All right, Malcolm, I'll start with you. The Victorian government has been able to find the quirk that income support is a federal government responsibility. The government wanted to essentially teach the lesson that why should we have to pick up the funding for governments that follow the advice of all of those people that I've just pointed out before. They found the wedge, they found it. The Prime Minister is now going to honour those payments. What do you think?
Well, I think you summarised it with the word wedge, Paul. Everyone's just trying to score points here. The National Cabinet has been in some ways a success, but in many ways a failure. And what it goes back to is politicians at state level playing with fear, trying to scare people. We've had capricious lockdowns in the 3 Labor states in particular, and they need to take responsibility. Even the corrupt, dishonest and incompetent World Health Organization now says that lockdowns are basically only to be used initially and to get control of a virus. So the way I see it, the states that are using lockdowns capriciously have not got control of the virus. It's an admission of failure. I asked the Chief Medical Officer in March in Senate estimates the components of a plan. I proposed 6. He agreed with them. I added a 7th. He agreed with that just 2 days ago. We're not managing this virus with a plan, Paul. We're just acting out of politically fomented fear. But I think the Prime Minister has done the right thing today by matching it. But the more he gives the states, the more capriciously and irresponsibly the states will act, because they know the feds will kick into the till. So it's a very difficult spot that the National Cabinet has taken our country into. It's not easy, but I think in the end, for this time, the Prime Minister is doing the right thing and coming to the rescue.
Rex, when legislation gets introduced at the state level that empower all of these lockdowns, those state of emergency legislation, in no state is there written into that legislation that if you go into a lockdown, that the state would have to pay that first few days. It's about $500 million that they've come up with in Victoria, but that is the exception to the rule. Before I get your attitude to the overall payments, is part of the responsibility of crossbenchers around the country that when they give the blank cheque for lockdowns, that they have to introduce financial disincentives for state governments to go into those lockdowns?
Yeah, well, I think whenever a piece of legislation is put up that deals with taxpayers' money, we do have to look very carefully at all aspects of these things. I'm not actually sure whether or not legislation will be introduced in relation to this. In the last budget, we passed laws that permitted the Finance Minister to have $40 billion of reserve, and that may be exercised in these circumstances, particularly when we've got the Parliament not sitting for the next couple of weeks. It's a possibility that they may just simply exercise discretion to make those payments out of that emergency fund.
Do you think they've made the right decision?
Look, I think you have to help Australians when they need help, and so I do say that the right decision has been made here. I think there's a number of mistakes that sit in the background that have to be called out. One of them is at the federal level, where we haven't done well with quarantine. We haven't done well with the vaccine rollout, and that has created the situation where we don't have a community that is well protected. But we also have to make sure that states don't overreact. I'm actually all in favour of lockdowns on small scales, bigger if necessary. We do need to follow medical advice, but a lot of the time that medical advice is not tendered, not contested. I think New South Wales has handled this pretty well in response to smaller outbreaks. Going right across Victoria, I don't understand why that's being done in these circumstances. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's a few things going on in the background that do need to get fixed.
Well, I'll tell you why it went statewide in Victoria, because the police union told the police officers, the brass, that police weren't going to be involved in rings of steel and all the rest of it. So it just was easier to tell everyone who were nowhere near the virus to lock it down. But Malcolm, again, these people, I get it, to be a doctor, all the rest of it, you're way smarter than a fat bloke on telly. But when the advice coming into some of these governments is coming from people saying don't touch footballs that have been kicked by people who've come from Melbourne, I think sometimes it's part of the role of the elected official to say, OK, that's a bit much.
I agree, Paul, and that's why I talked about the way that Queensland, Western Australia and Victoria have managed this or mismanaged this virus. The virus is managing these states. They haven't got control of the virus has got control of the state. And we've got to start really coming up with a plan. I haven't seen any steps towards a plan. As I said, I've asked the Chief Medical Officer for Australia about the 6 components, and then I added a 7th. They endorsed all of them. But we have not got a national or even a state plan that looks at those seven holistic steps for managing the plan, even though the Chief Medical Officer agrees with it. And, you know, we've only been focused on 2 things, lockdowns and vaccines. There are alternatives to vaccines that need to be considered. There are alternatives to lockdowns by far that need to be considered. So we need to really test which is what I did on 23rd of March last year when the government introduced its first job seeker and then job keeper. I said we'll be looking for the data and hold you accountable. We're doing that, and they're just not coming up with a plan for comprehensively managing. So then we end up with lunatic media stories and scare stories from politicians ruling the roost, and that's not good enough for Australians.
See, this is why I like the crossbench. This is why you should always support a minor party as well as whatever you're planning to do. And these are 2 good examples, or independents, of course, in Rex's case, about why I like them there, because they're able to ask the questions and push for some detail that the rest of us will frankly just get ignored for. Also, what about this, the returning to Queensland, where supposedly some people who were returning to Sunshine Coast Airport from Victoria clearly didn't have the virus, hadn't been to hotspots, that the police were going through their phones, literally thumbing through their phones, going through their photos. Now, I know that there has been literally a couple of examples of people lying about where they have come from, but how do you feel about the Queensland Police, Malcolm, going through people's phones to double-check where they've been in Melbourne, as if there's a photo of somebody licking a football that's been played with by sweaty men?
Maybe a football in the bag. Paul, the majority of Queensland cops are wonderful. They really do a good job, and sometimes under very stressful conditions. I really am impressed with the Queensland Police. In every group of people, it doesn't matter who you are, you've got people who want to take control and power goes to their heads. I'm sure that happens. I've seen it on Qantas, not on Virgin. I've seen it on Qantas. We've got the Nazis sometimes trying to really tell us what to do very vigorously and quite rudely. We've got some in the police doing the same. So I think people have to understand it's a difficult position in which the police are put. And you can see from what you said a little while ago, the Victorian police don't want to provide a ring of steel. So that led to Dan Andrews declaring his deputy declaring the whole state a lockdown. So it's a difficult situation. There are limits on privacy, though, but generally, from what I've seen at the border when we've come back from Canberra, they've been fabulous. They've been very courteous. They've been very polite. They've said quite clearly what they want, what they expect. If you give it to them, there's not much hassle. And I also noticed in the article you sent us that the Commissioner of Police in Queensland explained it very well. I think he said it really well. So it's a difficult circumstance. I think we've just got to be patient, and the police have just got to be, in some cases, a little bit better mannered. Let's
talk about our good old mates in China, Rex. Now, the suggestion from the federal government is that Labor's policy when it comes to China is simply to nitpick the position that exists currently between the federal government taking a strong stance against the ever-expansionist and terrible power that is China. Never forget slave labour. Never forget people put in jail because of the God that they believe in. Never forget about the depersoning of people who disagree with the central authority, and so on and so on and so on. Here's Each Way Albo.
Australia needs more strategy and less politics when it comes to managing our differences with China. Foreign policy isn't a game. It's not a photo op.
And here is Josh Frydenberg ripping into Each Way Albo, who, of course, has had both positions when it comes to China.
Well, I think Anthony Albanese is trying to make politics out of a very sensitive situation. I mean, the reality is we've taken decisions, whether that's around foreign investment, whether that's around foreign interference, whether that's around the Belt and Road policy, or whether that's around other national security issues in the telecommunications space. We've taken those decisions very much in the national interest, and we'll continue to take those decisions. We will draw a very clear and consistent line when it comes to these issues.
Rex, how do you feel about, let's start with Each Way and his position here, that it's all about politics here, Rex?
Well, can I just go back to when Victoria signed the Belt and Road initiative? I put up a Senate inquiry to look at the relationship between Australia and China, and I did so 6 times after that and never got support from either Labor or the Liberal Party. In fact, it was only the crossbench and the whole of the crossbench that supported me in those endeavours. That was a call to have a comprehensive look at our relationship, where it was going well, where improvements were needed, what sort of things we needed to think about moving forward, rejected by both Labor and Liberal. But in relation to the current policies being put forward by Labor, I note that they are silent on some very difficult questions, such as how do we deal with the 14 demands where China has suggested that we change or in fact sell out in some senses our sovereignty, our concerns about foreign interference. The list of 14 has not been addressed by the Labor Party. Their interaction with China goes all the way back to Gough Whitlam through to Hawke and Keating engaging in China. Then we saw Gillard with the Asian Century, her paper that came out. So Labor has always thought that they are able to basically lead in this particular area, but they are remaining silent on this list of 14 things that we need to kowtow to. And I think asking questions around that will draw out some of the flaws in their thinking.
What do you think about this one, Malcolm?
Well, I think there are 2 points I'd like to raise, Paul. The first is I want to commend Rex because he's exactly correct when he said that he's raised this motion looking for an inquiry into simply the relationship between China and Australia. That's all he wants. And we've backed him to the hilt every time. And every time Labor and Liberal get together with the Nationals and they vote it down. I don't know why they don't want to look at that. The second thing is that I think Australia needs to be very careful about our own productive capacity. The most important line of defence is our productive capacity, our ability to stand alone. The virus showed us that that's smashed when we have restrictions. We're destroying our energy policy. Our policy is destroying our energy, which is key to manufacturing. We've destroyed our property rights. We've destroyed our water. Our infrastructure is not coping. China looks upon those kinds of things as a sellout to our sovereignty, a sellout to our productive capacity, a sellout to our citizens. We don't even stand up for the values. You know that. You're one of the main people in Australia who talks about Australian values and culture and lifestyle. They're all sold out.
Yep.
And so what we need to do is to come back and get back to basics in this country and show the Chinese that we have leadership here that will stand up for the people and not betray the people with weakness. So they're the 2 things I'd like to say. And until we get those 2 things correct, the Chinese are just going to treat us like dirt. No respect.
Now, an ABC board member has said that there needs to be more conservative voices on taxpayer television, radio and the internet. Obviously, I would agree, because while they might pass all of the bias surveys because they're able to get lefty Liberals on to say party representation as opposed to ideology, values and all of those things get represented. Here is George Christensen talking about the chair of the ABC, Ida Buttrose, who it seems like is doubling down and digging in.
Ida Buttrose, a very nice lady, a very successful business person, but she's someone with a heap of gongs, someone who obviously likes to be loved, and she is loved. She's one of those people that's considered a national treasure. Probably not the right person that this government needs there at the ABC. We need someone that is kicking that organisation into shape. That is the only way that something is going to get done.
Again, Rex, I don't think that the option here is a whole bunch of sackings. I think it's a whole bunch of hirings. What do you think?
Oh, look, I don't watch a lot of television. I'm always pretty busy, but I do turn to the ABC looking at news. I watch Sky as well. Look, I think there's a great diversity across our media, and I work also with journalists in each of the different entities, and I find that all of them are well-meaning. I know that the government often gets frustrated with the ABC, but I also recall that in circumstances where the Labor Party are in power, they have also been frustrated with the ABC. Look, I think that there are many Australians that like to watch the ABC, and there are many Australians that disagree with the ABC, but I could say the same thing about Sky as well. And I do appreciate there is a difference in that the ABC, of course, is taxpayer funded.
Well, that's the whole thing, isn't it, Senator? Which is that's the whole difference, isn't it, Malcolm?
Yes, it certainly is. The ABC has a responsibility to be balanced and fair. But really there are two ABCs, Paul, and I think you're aware of this. And it seems like Joe Gesh is aware of this as well. There's the Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne axis, maybe a little bit of Brisbane, certainly a little bit of Brisbane in that are biased to the left, undoubtedly. They're ideologists and they're just pushing an ideology. Then there's the rural ABC around Australia, especially in the rural areas. When we go for an interview in the rural areas, we have no concerns at all with ABC journalists because they have to go home that day, go to the pub, go to the sporting clubs and mix with the community. And the community holds them accountable. And most of the ABC, everyone I think in the ABC that I've met in the country have been well-mannered, polite, and yet they dig into the issues, but they dig into them in a very honest and fair way. And I love that and I respect that. The ABC provides a vital service in the country, perhaps less so with the internet being so dominant, but in emergencies and so on, the ABC is vital. But in the city, sell it off. It's got to go because it's just absolutely hopeless. It's just a waste of money. And let's put up the Sydney ABC network for sale and see who'll buy it. I don't think you'll get a buyer.
Thank you very much, Senators. Do appreciate it. We are always the friend of the crossbench here. You know that. Way before they turn to you the day after an election, we talk to you for the years that you served there as well. Appreciate it. Do appreciate it. Thank you very much.